We are very proud and happy that our first guest is the award-winning Irish writer Colum McCann. He has published 7 novels and 3 collections of stories. His novel Let the Great World Spin was published in 2009 and won worldwide acclaim, including the National Book Award in the US and many other major international prizes. His work has been published in over 40 languages, and in 2017, he was elected to the American Academy of Arts. He is the co-founder of the nonprofit global story exchange organization Narrator 4, and he teaches at the MFA program in Hunter College, New York. Tonight's conversation will be about Colum's latest novel, Apeirogon, that was published in February 2020. And actually today it received the award from the Jewish National Book Council in the United States, which makes Colum one of the very few non-Jewish writers to receive it in 70 years history. Apeirogon also won the French award for the best international publication in 2020. Colum will be interviewed by Veronika Tuckerova. She's a literary scholar, art critic, and translator. She has been teaching in Harvard University's Slavic department since 2013. She grew up in Prague and studied at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York and at Columbia University. Her interests include Czech and German literature, art and literature of dissent and underground, visual studies, and translation theory and practice. She is currently completing a book on Franz Kafka's reception in Czechoslovakia during communism. Their conversation will run for about 45 minutes. Please feel free to send your questions that will be answered at the end of the conversation. The conversation is being recorded and will be available online later. So Veronika and Colin, thank you so much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pavla, for inviting us. It's a big pleasure to speak at the Havel Library Foundation and to be able to interview Colin about his very extraordinary novel, Apeirogon, which tells a story of the Israeli Rami Elhanan and the Palestinian Bassam Aramin, their young daughters who have been killed in the ongoing conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, and much more. It is a novel of extraordinary richness, of a mosaic of many motifs that are abandoned and taken up again. Among them, motifs such as birds, guns, walls, wires, barriers, eyes, blindness, vision, surveillance, rivers, myth, storytelling, olive, orange, apricot, and palm trees, water scarcity, mathematics, music, sculptures, and much more. We can possibly enter the novel through any of these motifs. One section is set in the Theresienstadt ghetto or camp and talks about the Czech Jewish German figures, the composer Viktor Ullmann and Emil Utitz, once a school friend of Franz Kafka from Prague. Viktor Ullmann wrote an opera while in Theresienstadt ghetto and was later murdered in Auschwitz. But he managed to give the score of his opera to the ghetto librarian Emil Utitz. Utitz survived. So why did you, Colin, include this particular story? How do Ullmann and Utitz, real historical figures, fit in the story of your novel, and what interests you about them?
Well, first of all, thank you, and what an honor it is to be talking with you, and to be in the presence of all the people who are involved with the Havel Foundation, and my respect for everything that the writer himself has done. And then the people who have shepherded his career and allowed us to talk about democracy, allowed us to talk about belonging, allowed us to talk about exile, allowed us to talk about so many things through the prism of his remembrance. I'm really honored to be here, and also knowing the links that many Irish writers had with Havel, including Samuel Beckett and Seamus Heaney and many others. I think in certain respects he was possibly an honorary Irishman, and certainly the work resonates in extraordinary ways. And in relation to your question, and thank you for the question, especially on Holocaust Remembrance Day. I wrote this book, and I wanted it to be a symphony. I was bringing in pieces from, as you so beautifully spoke in your introduction, from so many different angles, and trying to gather them all together as musical notes, and to bring them in to make a human sound. And in the course of writing this book, which essentially, as you say, is about two fathers who lost their daughters, one Israeli, one Palestinian, I began to realize that this story is all stories. And John Berger, who I'm sure you know, as an art critic and one of the great writers of our time, and he wrote Ways of Seeing, said, "Never again will a single story be told as if it were the only one." And I think what he meant by that was that all stories are kaleidoscopic and deserve to be treated in a kaleidoscopic manner. And all of our stories touch other stories. One of the things that I knew for certain, if I was going to talk about Israel and Palestine, and having known Rami and Bassam and their backgrounds, was that the Holocaust itself was enormously important to both of them. For Rami, as an Israeli, it was something he was obsessed by in very obvious ways. And he was also the grandson of what he called an Auschwitz survivor, or an Auschwitz graduate, he says. And for Bassam too, the Holocaust was extraordinarily important, because he saw a documentary when in prison, and it sort of shook him to the core, and it made him question certain things about his own sense of knowledge and so on. Anyway, so Ullman came along in my research, and Ullman struck the chords of my heart. I mean, it was such an incredible story to write this opera while in the concentration camp, and using art as a fulcrum against power, and using art to achieve, beauty in the face of all available evidence. And they produced a powerful series of performances in the camp. And I was taken by the story, not only because it's part of all of our stories, but because it also spoke to a sort of, I suppose, poetic part of myself that needed to include it in the music. And I was completely, taken by the notion. And in fact, it was only today that I was walking around. I'm working on a new novel, and I started thinking about Ullman again, because you and I had talked in preparation. We'll confess, we talked in preparation for this conversation a couple of days ago, and you mentioned Ullman, and he's been in the back of my head, sort of trilling in the back of my head now. And I think I'm writing a new novel, and I think he might appear again in some ways. I mean, we write towards that which obsesses us, I suppose, and this was one of the things that obsessed me and upset me, and all sorts of things. So it was an enormously important story.
Thank you. What I think is extremely powerful in your novel is that there are so many of stories that are similarly important as Ullman, and they coexist in so many ways, and they influence. There are so many stories that really are interwoven within these various sub stories of the main two stories of the book.
Right.
So we could be really talking about a great number of them. So let's just for our audience who may not read the book yet, let's talk about the structure for a little bit.
Sure.
So and the structure is very interesting and compelling, and I would say original. I don't have really any comparison that I could make, but basically we read this. So there is a symmetric structure. There is 500 entries, and there is one page, and then there is again 500 entries, and they are numbered going up, ascending, and then descending. So can you, but of course the reader doesn't understand it, I think, unless unless you scientifically first try to just get into the structure of the book. Right. So can you tell us a little bit more, how did you arrive at this form, at this format?
Yeah, and you're so right. I mean, the reader should not be aware of this really until afterwards. And then they say, well, why was that novel structured in 1001 chapters, or cantos, I call them? And there's a lot of small little chapters, and goes from 1 to 500, and from 500 down to 1. In fact, the novel can be read backwards and forwards, and it has all sorts of mathematical things that are going on within it. Now, that sounds like I'm smart and that I'm a mathematician, and that I'm the furthest thing from smart, and I'm the furthest thing from a mathematician. But I will say this, that I stumbled upon the form, and it felt right. And Sam Beckett, 50 years ago, one of Havel's, one of Havel's heroes, there are letters back and forth between the two. Sam Beckett said amazingly, I think, the job of the artist now is to find a form that accommodates the mess. And I was like, okay, so it's my job to find a form that accommodates the mess. Well, what is the mess that I'm looking at? Well, the mess, not only myself as an artist, but the mess that I want to talk about is the mess of the lives of Rami Elhanan and Bassam Aramin and their 2 dead daughters, the mess of Israel and Palestine, the mess of the extension, the complicity, whether you're in the Czech Republic or in the Republic of Ireland, or if you're in the United States, how we're all sort of complicit in what's going on in the occupation. All of these things that were going on. So I thought, okay, I'm going to write a fractured novel. I've been calling my students for a while. I say, write a fractured, write a novel that could be read on the internet, but also read in a book and look good, and some of them tried it, but it was obviously an obsession of mine. And then I decided to go ahead and try it myself. So I said, okay, I'm going to write 100 sections. And that's a lot. And it's going to be real fractured and all over the place. And then I'm going through and I said, wow, maybe I'll write 365 sections. And then I realized that Rami and Bassam were telling the stories of their daughters in order to keep them alive, right? So they go around the world and they tell the stories of their daughters, and they keep the girls alive by telling this over and over and over again. And who tells a story to keep themselves alive? Well, Scheherazade. And then I thought, okay, it has to be, whether you call it Arabian Nights or 1001 Nights, it has to be in 1001 different cantos. And that was a revelation for me. Now, I could pretend that I knew that from the start, but no way, I am not that smart. And a writer, she or he, finds the form that accommodates the mess. And then I also think it was Creeley who said that content dictates form. And so you find the form from the language and the poetry, and if it feels right, then it's all right. And this is, I have to say to people who haven't read it, I mean, it's initially a confusing novel, and it's deliberately so, because I'm confused. And I was confused by Israel and Palestine. I'm still confused. I'm confused about Ireland. I mean, I grew up in Ireland and I wrote about the peace process. I'm confused. And one of the great things I think that we can do these days is acknowledge the fact that we're confused. Because I think we're so much of what's gone wrong with where we are now is that we're diseased with certainty. You know, I'm right, you're wrong, stay away from me. But if we can acknowledge the messiness, if we can acknowledge the fact that I don't actually know, then we might get somewhere. So, and I'm talking too much here, and I want to let you come back in. But I will say this: it was really important for me to deliberately confuse the reader as to what was going on in the first 20, 30 pages, so that they either threw the book away, which some people did, or they surrendered themselves to the confusion. And when you surrender yourself to the confusion, there's something beautifully social about that. And you allow yourself, instead of thinking about facts and figures and borders and 1948 and who's Israeli and who's Palestinian, you begin to think about the human heart, you know, and all the issues that the human heart itself presents. And if you think about the great writers like Havel and Heaney and Beckett and you know Toni Morrison and so many others, that's what they have been writing about. And so what I wanted to do was to try and get at some of the simple humanity. I mean, sounds so simple. You know, we're all human, but get at some of the humanity behind the stories of these men, their daughters, their families, and their nations.
Well, I must say it's very effective, whether you thought of this form ahead of time or whether it's just, whether the material shaped the form. And then, of course, almost towards the end, and I was thinking about, okay, so 1001 night, we are at the storytelling. And then towards the end, I got to one entry that is about that. And it simply says in one sentence, 1001 night, a ruse for life in the face of death. And you just leave it at that. And this entry is just one line, but then there is this incredible story of an Italian man who was trying to translate from the Arabic the 1001 night, and he was shot. He was a member of Fatah, and he was shot by Mossad, and the book was shot through with a bullet. And now, is this a true story?
True, it's an entirely true story. You know, the man was from Nablus in the West Bank, from a prominent family. He moved to Italy. He was a translator. The one thing he wanted was, there was no good translation he found of 1001 Nights into Italian. It had gone through French and English and all these different things, and hopped around all these different languages. And what he wanted to do was translate it. And so he was shot because he was supposedly, and probably not, a member of Black September in the wake of the Munich killings. It was a retribution killing. But they shot him with 13 bullets, but one of the bullets went through a copy of 1001 Nights, which he had in his pocket. Now, you can't make this shit up. You just can't. I mean, seriously, like sometimes these stories come along, and if you made it up, people would say it's impossible. And so one of the jobs that I had, and one of the joys actually, Veronika, that I had in this book was like questioning what is fiction and what is fact, what's true, what's not true. And this is, as we know, whether we be in the United States or Britain or Slovakia, the Czech Republic, whatever it happened. The question of the day is, what is a fact? What is true? All this idea of false things and this Trumpian idea about media and so on. And the question for the novelist, the defining question of the past 20 years, it seems to me, has been, and many great writers have much greater than me have confronted it. But the question is, how do you define what is a fact? And how do you define what is a textual thing? Where does the heart lie? And where does the truth lie? How do we identify what the truth is? And how do we stop the truth from being destroyed? And surely Havel was talking about that for a long, long, long time, and trying to distill it in his work. And so this novel, Apeirogon, it's called a novel, but the men are real. They could be watching us tonight from Jericho and Jerusalem. And the question is, was I honest in the book? And I think Rami and Bassam would both come on here. They're among my best friends. And they would say, yeah, he made some stuff up, but it is completely honest. And not only is it honest, but it's also true. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back for that. I'm trying to say that it's really important not to manipulate the facts so that they become untrue. And truth itself can become mercenary in certain ways. You can or certainly facts can be mercenary. You can pack them up wherever you want them to go. So one of the things that I wanted to do with this book was to question the notion of what's fact, what's fiction, and just tell a story at the same time.
Well, it does work on the level of a story, because we have some parts that are much more novelistic, I would say. The story really pulls the reader along, and it really becomes a page turner. But incredibly enough, I think exactly this part of the novel are the ones based on the real stories of Rami and Bassam. Do you agree? I mean, or did you make? Or at least like in my reading, just all the more action parts, or the parts that tell the story of the murders of their daughters and their search and their everyday lives. These are I would say, page turners in the novel. So
yeah, I mean,
you make up parts of it to make it, to read that well, or?
Yeah, I mean, it could be unrelenting to continue, to do this stuff. So and sometimes I just shoot off and like talk about Prince, or I talk about Sinead O'Connor, and talk about for example, Smadar, when she died, she was with her friends walking through Jerusalem. Now, I say in the book that she was listening on a Walkman to Sinead O'Connor and Nothing Compares to You. Now, I do know that she loved Sinead O'Connor. She had shaved her head to look like Sinead O'Connor. Her favorite song was Nothing Compares to You. But in in the novel, I blend all of that stuff in. And whether she was listening to that song at the moment that she was killed or not, I don't know, and I will never know, and none of us will ever know. But to suggest it puts us in the pulse of the moment. And this is what the writer must do. The writer must do, as Joyce would have said, recreate life out of life. And so a book recreates life, and that's kind of what you wanted to do. And if it's okay, we talked about maybe reading one section of the book, which is the section 1001, which sits in the very middle of the book. This is a British version of the book, and it tells the whole plot, but it also gives away the thing that I didn't know for a long time. It took me 5 years to write this book, but for about 2 years, 2.5 years, Veronika, I didn't even know who the narrator was. Now, can you believe that? Now you study Kafka, you talk about writing. Like, how can a writer not even know who his narrator happens to be, and yet still be writing a novel? So we'll talk about that. I'll just read this section. It takes about 2 minutes, and then we can maybe talk about that. Section 1001. Once upon a time, and not so long ago, and not so far away, Rami Elhanan, an Israeli, a Jew, a graphic artist, husband of Nurit, father of Alik and Guy and Yigal, father too of the late Smadar, traveled on his motorbike from the suburbs of Jerusalem to the Kremazon monastery in the mainly Christian town of Beit Jala near Bethlehem in the Judean hills, to meet with Bassam Aramin, a Palestinian, a Muslim, a former prisoner, an activist born near Hebron, husband of Salwa, father of Arab and Arin and Muhammad and Ahmad and Iba, father too of the late Abir, 10 years old, shot dead by an unnamed Israeli border guard in East Jerusalem almost a decade after Rami's daughter Smadar, 2 weeks away from 14, was killed in the western part of the city by 3 Palestinian suicide bombers, Bashar Sawala, Youssef Shuli, and Tawfiq Yassin from the village of Asariya al-Shamaliya near Nablus in the West Bank. A place of intrigue to the listeners gathered in the red brick monastery perched on the hillside in the mountains of the beloved, by the terraced vineyard in the shadow of the wall, having come from as far apart as Belfast and Kyushu, Paris and North Carolina, Santiago and Brooklyn, Copenhagen and Terezin, on an ordinary day at the end of October, foggy, tinged with cold. To listen to the stories of Bassam and Rami, and to find within their stories another story, a song of songs, discovering themselves, you and me, in the stone-tiled chapel, where we sit for hours, eager, hopeless, buoyed, confused, cynical, complicit, silent, our memories imploding, our synapses skipping in the gathering dark, remembering while listening all of those stories that are yet to be told. So that's the very center of the book, and it says to the reader, you and me, we are in this together. You're writing this book with me. Now, I'm not sure if that's the stupidest thing that I've ever thought in my life or the cleverest thing that I've ever thought in my life. I honestly don't know. Maybe every book is narrated by the reader. But when it hit me to know that this particular book is actually narrated by you, the reader, I thought, wow, okay, I have something now.
Well, we sometimes have books that address the reader, right? Written in the second person.
Sure.
but it's something. This is something else. This is something you are envisioning that we, as a reader, I think it may work in the way that just the way these various pieces hang together is only through the work of the reader.
That's right.
And everyone makes a little bit different sense of them. And this is why I picked, I picked the story about Ullman, but I could have also picked, there is a little section about pomegranates. And I think I will post it somewhere because it's such a lovely, lovely piece. So what I'm saying is that each of these many stories are communicating with the reader, and we are spinning our own stories around them, or we are adding, there are many birds in the book, and it's also one of my questions about all these birds. And I love how you describe the statues of Constantin Brancuș, the Romanian modernist, and his beautiful pieces of art, of stone and wood, which are very simplified shapes of birds. But so for example, it's this one, but I can think of my own visions of birds and hear birds in Massachusetts, and I am, spinning off my own stories that I could almost be a co-author in a way, imposing and, just writing a little section which would fit, and it would not destroy the overall effect, because it would be the piece of the mosaic or the kaleidoscope, as you.
Exactly, and that's beautifully put, because that's what it intended to be, a mosaic, a kaleidoscope. And in certain ways, do you remember as a kid those make your own adventure stories where you go to page 13 and if you say left, you go to page 170, if you go right, in certain ways it's like that. But at the heart of all of this is the truth of two men who tell the stories that are truly heartbreaking, and the fact that they shouldn't be friends. They should not be friends. Against all available evidence, they should not be friends, and they sort of are supposed to hate one another, but they refuse to do so. And that's what attracted me to them. As a writer, honestly, you have to say, what right do I have to go into this particular story? All right, I'm Irish. I grew up in Ireland, but I live in America, and I'm not Muslim, and I'm not Jewish, and to begin with, I knew very little about Israel and Palestine and the history and so on. I probably still know very little, but I do know the territory of the human heart. And I knew that this particular story, when I heard it, broke my heart. And what I wanted to do was to do what I think a lot of writers do, is confront the heartbreak of the world and have the readers then, take it somewhere else. And here's the thing: your reader is always much more intelligent than yourself. Once writers realize that, then they can live in the world again, because a reader will interpret something and add to the book. Once I've finished a book, it's done. But then the book gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, because people read it, and people who are smarter than me read it, and then interpret it in new and profound ways, and lead me on to new revelations about whatever it happens to be. This particular book, what it wants to do is to say a very simple thing that two men are talking about. We need to know each other. Now,
so by a story that broke your heart, you mean the story of the friendship?
Yes. Yeah. the story of the friendship, the story of the daughters, you know, yeah, and you know, anybody who listens to Rami and Bassam, listen, when I first met them, the very first day I met them, I thought, these are two ordinary blokes, you know, they're sitting down at a table in a town called Beit Jala and they're telling a story, and within half an hour, I was in floods of tears. And I knew my life was changed from having heard what they were saying. They weren't being manipulative. They weren't doing it. They were just telling me the story of what had happened, and what it is that they feel can happen as a result of storytelling, the power of storytelling, the sort of like literary instinct behind their political instinct, if you will.
I'm sorry, so were you there at the Kremison Monastery? Is it where you heard their story?
No.
No.
That's fiction. See that's funny. It was in Beit Jala, but one of the things about the story is that, you know, it's a Jewish man who wakes up in the morning and he drives to a monastery, and then they meet all these activists and they tell a story, and then this Muslim man drives home to Jericho late at night. That's the bookends of the story. 24 hours, you know, very simple story. But I wanted them to meet in a Christian monastery in Palestine. Now, the monastery exists, it's true. They have been there, but they never told their story there. So that's part of the part of the weaving of the fiction, and why I call it still a novel, but why I think you know, it's true. You know, they have never been there, but they have actually been there. Do you know? Does that sound weird?
Yeah, no, it doesn't sound weird. But you said something very important about who has the right to tell a certain story. Do you have the right to tell a story of loss and pain that you didn't live, of a story of someone? I mean, of course, the novelists do this all the time, otherwise we wouldn't have any fiction. But this is something else when these characters are real and we are talking about their lives.
Yeah.
So
it's a massive question, Veronika.
I know and we can just leave it hang.
Oh, no, I don't want to leave it hanging. Here's what I want to say, is that all those people who talk about you know, cultural appropriation, and you know, the fact that a lot of writers do not have a right to go into a different place and a different space, and you know, guess what? They're right. They're entirely 100% beautifully right. And this all came from academia, and it came from primarily left-wing scholars who started to examine the motives of writers. And you know, yes, have writers gone in, or corporations gone in, and have they condescended? Have they patronized? Have they done all these things to cultures and plundered? Yes. But on the same hand, now not a different hand, but on the exact same hand, in the exact same argument, there is the chance for the artist, whether she be, you know, writer or, you know, photographer or painter, to go into another place with her head bowed, saying and admitting to the fact, I'm stupid. I do not know. I need to know. I will close my eyes until you tell me that I can open my eyes, and please instruct me. Please allow me to understand. And this becomes then a cause not of cultural appropriation, but cultural celebration. That you go in to increase your own cultural appreciation by acknowledging, you know, others, and not, you know, plundering or patronizing or anything, but acknowledging your own limits. So one of the things that I have to do as a writer is go in and acknowledge my own limits, and listen, and learn how to listen to people. And I don't want that to be, you know, chest thumping or anything like that. I know that it, you know, it's difficult to do this stuff, but if I don't do it, I would be ashamed of myself. And when I heard the stories of Rami and Bassam, I thought, I can do this. Should I leave it only to a Palestinian writer? Or should I leave it only to a Jewish writer? Or should I leave it to, and so maybe I was the one who could go in there, and I didn't have any skin in the game. I mean, I'm Irish, yes, and I have certain political leanings, blah, blah, blah. And I think they're probably pretty apparent to most people, but I wasn't, going in to make a point. To be didactic is to be boring immediately. To be didactic, to know what it is that you want to say is completely boring. And all I really wanted to do was to go in and capture the tension and the beauty of those moments. And whether I did it or not, it's not up to me. But that was my job.
So did you travel to Palestine already when you knew you wanted to write a book with them? Yeah.
I was there so many times. I walked through checkpoints with Bassam. I had dinner with his family. I rode on Rami's motorbike. I got to meet people. I hung around in Jerusalem. I walked. I went to Ramallah. I met Raja Shahadeh, one of the great Palestinian writers of of our generation, if not all time. I talked with poets. I argued with people. I got to know it in lots of different ways. Yeah, you have a responsibility to try to get it as correct as you possibly can. Some people dispute what it is that I've said, but I stand by it. And one of the interesting things is that in the course of writing it, I gave this to dozens of Israelis and dozens of Palestinians to look over it and to make sure that I got it right. Of course, some people would say, that's right. And then the next same day, a person from quote unquote the other side would say, well, that's wrong. But, this is and we have to hold these contradictions. We have to hold these complications. Again, going back to Havel, I mean,
yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have? Well, I wanted to just be okay. We will go back to Havel, but first I want to ask whether it felt differently when you wrote a novel about Ireland and Northern Ireland. Whether you felt more involved or more as an insider to the conflict.
It's a beautiful question. That's a profound and difficult question. Look, I grew up in Dublin. My mum is from Derry. I spent my summers in Derry. I wrote a novel called Transatlantic, which touches on the Irish peace process, but I primarily wrote a short story, which I'm very proud of, called Everything in This Country Must, which is really about Northern Ireland. And I think I was happy with that particular story. Do I want to remain in Dublin? Do I want to remain in Northern Ireland? Do I want to remain only, say, in New York, where I happen to live right now? No, I want to go elsewhere. I want to live my life out loud. I want to know other people. I want to discover other things, and tell other stories. So, did it touch my heart more or less to write about Northern Ireland than to write about Israel and Palestine, to be honest with you? Both of them, it mattered the same to me. And I don't mean that to sound trite or silly or
I mean more whether you felt more because you were more familiar with the subject, whether the entire experience was different.
Yeah.
But okay, so
after 6 years though of Israel and Palestine, I felt pretty close to the subject. Yeah.
So Václav Havel was awarded an honorary degree at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem in the spring of 1990. And he had a speech. Of course, he was writing his own speeches. And in the speech, he was talking about Franz Kafka, believe it or not. I don't know how surprised or how even familiar the politicians or well, he was at the university, so they must have known Kafka, but he said that he has a very intimate relationship to Kafka. And if Kafka didn't write his own work, and if Havel was a better writer, he would write his work, which just puzzled me since. But we don't think of Havel's writing as, as similar to Kafka's, although it was one of his influences, as was Samuel Beckett and Ionesco for the absurd theater and so on. Anyway, maybe I'll just leave this, but I think it nicely a little bit correlates to what you are saying about, how much we can identify with somebody else. And in Havel's case, with the entire work and in the entire experience that Kafka went through was really appropriated by Havel as saying that, well, this is really my own and I would have written it had I been a better writer.
I think that's an extraordinary story. I think that and I think it's entirely true. I think it probably speaks to Havel's humility and decency and recognition of depth, and not necessarily an echo of style in any particular way, but an echo of the desire to, what was it Kafka talked about, like to break the frozen, break open the frozen ice, and I think a lot of writers recognize that, and when we see someone do it, and someone do it sort of extraordinarily well, like Heaney, like Beckett, like Havel, like so many that we've been talking about, we're sort of in awe of it, which is and it's what every writer wants to do, want to break open the frozen heart, and open things up a little bit. But that was 1990 when he went to Jerusalem.
Yeah, it was one of his first trips.
Wow.
He went to New York, and I think Pavla probably knows better all his biography and his trip. But as a president, he became president in January 1990, and one of his first trips as a president was to Jerusalem.
Wow.
And he had this amazing speech there.
That's amazing.
Short, but and of course we have the tradition of dissidents that Havel was crucial to, and I briefly may mention just the philosopher Patočka, Kafka's teacher, who spoke of the solidarity of the shaken, and I see something of that between Bassam and Rami. So what Patočka had in mind was that when people experience something fundamentally shaking their existence, when they encounter something fundamental such as war or experience of totalitarianism, they are transformed, and something new, authentic may happen with them, and which opens up space for solidarity. And that's the foundation of the Charter 77 movement and the human rights movement that Havel was the spokesperson for.
Yeah, that's so gorgeous. I mean, I love this idea of the solidarity of the shaken, or the shattered, or and then the ability to make a mosaic out of what has been broken. There was a Slovakian woman that I met one time when I was writing a novel called Zoli, which is about the Romani people in that part of the world. Wrote it many years ago. But anyway, cut a long story short, she said, but by the bones they have broken, we can tell new weather. In other words, she had like broken arms and broken legs, and she could actually tell shifts in the weather by the shifts in her body. And you talk about the solidarity of the shaken, the solidarity of the shattered, and the ability for people to pull something like extraordinary out of the shatteredness, if that's a word. Rami Elhanan and Bassam Aramin, what they try to do is to pull some solidarity out of everything that is broken and to create a new sort of weather. They're really courageous. They're really brave. They're a little bit mad. They're kind of funny. And I hope that they can come to New York, and we can do a thing at the center in New York, or we can go to the Czech Republic together, or whatever it happens to be when this pandemic ends, because I think the world needs to meet these men who are very simple men in the end. Very simple men. They and they don't have any airs or graces, but that's a beautiful idea, the solidarity of the shaken or the solidarity of the shattered. Like, it's really extraordinary. Thank you.
So I think we are running out of our time, and we also wanted to speak about your nonprofit organization, Narrative 4. So should we just look if we have questions? And
oh, please, yes.
I can look, and maybe in the meanwhile, you can explain a little bit because it's a big part of your work as a novelist, but also as a, you do more than write. So
yeah.
if you
this is the project of my heart. It's Narrator 4. It's a non-profit organization where we bring primarily young people together to step into one another's shoes and to inhabit one another's stories in an act of what we call radical empathy to create action on the ground. Now, that all sounds like gobbledygook, blah, 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 blah. But let me tell you how it works. So, for example, we go into a school in the South Bronx in New York, a very poor urban school, primarily African-American, or immigrant. And then we match them with a school down in, say, Eastern Kentucky, poor school, primarily white and rural, and like these kids seem like a million miles away from one another. But when they get together through the act and the art of storytelling, they realize how nuanced they are and how actually incredibly similar they happen to be in their differences, because we don't want to be the same, that we want to celebrate our differences. We've seen extraordinary results in terms of engagement, empathy, like even school results going up and SAT scores and all these things when people start to talk to one another. Because you need to know me and I need to know you. And, and we all know that. That's a fundamental truth. But guess what? There's a lot of politicians, there's a lot of corporations, there's a lot of people out there who make a lot of money by not allowing us to talk to one another. And this fear and this ignorance that is created through silence is the thing that we have to do to speak truth to power. And that's the way that we have to do it. So Narrative 4 is about bringing people together from diverse backgrounds and saying, hey, let's talk to one another, let's understand one another, and let's embrace the messiness, as we talked about very early on in the conversation.
Well, I think it's extremely in need nowadays, right? When just simply looking, even in the US, how divided the country is and how
Absolutely.
Our stories differ one from another.
Yes.
So let me look at some of the questions. So the first one, so several of them come to another quote from your novel, "Geography is everything." One of your single sentence chapters that is repeated, especially in the second downward fall of the bird's wing. What is the dramatic design of your architectural plot here? Now,
Ooh,
I'm not.
nice
Yeah.
question.
Yep.
The dramatic design of my architectural plot, that's a sentence I'm going to steal from here. And this is where your readers become, more clever, as we talked about, than you, the writer, happen to be. To me, I was going on a gut feeling. It was emotional and it was musical, and I wanted to repeat it. It felt right. And yes, while the novel does have a certain amount of balance, I'm also very much interested in acknowledging that there is no balance between the occupier and the occupied. These are some of the questions that we really have to talk about. But the architecture of the novel is very much about music and gut feeling and instinct.
And the silence is right.
Exactly. There's even 2 sections that are completely blank in the book. I mean, so there's 1,001 sections, but it's related to the idea of amicable numbers, a mathematical notion of prime numbers and factors and so on. But that's kind of geeky mathematical stuff that some people get and some people don't get. It's okay.
After all your research, what are your expectations or hopes, disappointments for Israel and Palestine in the future?
Oh, wow.
That's a big one.
That's a big one and a beautiful one. Hey, listen, this is what I'm going to say. That for years and years and years, power has pushed down, and at a certain stage, and maybe it's now, or maybe it's 10 years from now, power is going to actually come from underneath. I'm interested in emergent theories, like emergent flocks of birds working together. That a single bird is intelligent, yes, but when birds work together in extraordinary ways, they create flocks that do things that defy any human imagination. I do think that young people can be there to be these emergent flocks, and that storytelling might eventually be the building block for something approaching a new Arab Spring or a new form of peaceful engagement. If you think I'm mad, just have a look at a young girl called Greta Thunberg and see what she has done after walking out of school at the age of 13 on a Friday afternoon, and then suddenly building it into a worldwide movement. It can happen. It takes a lot of patience and takes a lot of desire, but I'd rather be the person talking about this sort of stuff than be the squinty-eyed cynic sitting in the corner saying it can't happen. It can happen.
Another question. I confess I haven't read the book yet, but I noted in a review
I haven't either.
The last sentence of the first chapter is geography here is everything. Extrapolating from that, when we think about our democracy today, it could be said that cultural geography is everything. As you wrote, did you consider how your book connected to the United States today? Do you feel that today?
Absolutely. But it also, I meant it for it to be a book about Ireland and, and Sweden and, South Africa. But as it turns out, it was actually more a book about the United States. And you see these things that are going on now. We need some sort of like American Bassams and American Ramis to stand up and have the force of their moral argument and to talk about it. And guess what? I mean, I think this is really important, Veronika, that we have to risk humiliation. People can say whatever they want about us. They can take you down. They can do their little Twitters. They can do all these little things, but you have to risk it in order to say something that you hope will help change the reality on the ground. And I think that everybody who's listening here this evening, they're the ones who can actually do some stuff about this, and I do think a lot of it has to do with stories and storytelling.
Well, I had another set of questions, but I will let about this. I mean, does every story count? Whose story counts? If you have competing stories, you know. But let's just look.
Well, that's a good question. Whose stories count? I mean, does everybody's stories count, and can one story overwhelm another one? Listen, the only thing I'll say in relation to that is that there is no gold medal when it comes to storytelling. It is not an Olympics. And the most profound thing is that we need to actually just tell the story. That there is a democracy in storytelling that defies the idea that one is better than the other. And I think we have to examine that and push that more and more and more, because certain people think that their story is more important than the others, and they're wrong.
How about a novel exposing the pain encountered by a white supreme man and a female immigrant, given your 2 years voyage across America? The need for radical empathy could be more acute. I think, yeah, so it's, asking about, you know.
I mean, yeah, you know, to write a novel like that, I mean, it has to be the time, and it has to be the place, and it has to be the instinct of the writer. I think there are plenty of writers gonna do that sort of thing, and I'm entirely aware of the themes that are going on there, and that's a smart question.
You did write a story from a woman's point of view.
Many times.
Many times. So another question: if truth is a goal, whatever that is the notion of alternative facts a potential pathway to get us there? Yeah, well, that's the tricky one.
I don't think that's so tricky. Truth is the goal, yeah, but alternative facts are like, the way I interpret it, and I might be wrong, are seem to be just a distortion. The most important thing here is not absolute truth; it's textural truth. Does it feel right? Is it something in your gut that to be entirely true? And I think when most of the history of the world resolves itself, it does come down to the notion that certain people sit on the right side of history. And I will tell you this: Rami and Bassam they sit right now, but they certainly will sit in the future on the right side of history. And they don't do alternative facts. They go for a deep emotional truth. And what that person is asking, I think, is, don't be didactic, don't make grand statements, but get down grounded in the tiny, because the local is the universal, and if you're smart enough, you should allow the local to be the universal. So the granular detail, the atom, will reveal the soul of something.
Could you speak more about the significance of birds in your book?
Oh gosh, the birds were fun. I wasn't an ornithologist whatsoever, and knew nothing about birds, but I was taken by the idea that there was a bird ringing center there. And then I realized that all these birds were coming from, like, South Africa, Mali, Algeria, Ireland, Sweden, the Czech Republic, wherever else it happened to be, France, and flying over this little corridor of land in Israel and Palestine. We were all going there. And it seemed to me then to be the perfect image to say that we're all involved, we're all complicit, and we need to engage. But it's also about borders and boundaries. And birds don't know what a border is. Birds don't know what a passport is. And in a certain way, we're all birds. And I wanted to talk about that, and yet also say that the stories of Abir and Smadar are stories that we can all land upon no matter what part of the world we happen to come from.
Lovely. Weren't you able to spend much time at the Aida refugee camp in Bethlehem? I have a friend who grew up there, one of 11 children, and now lives here in upstate New York. He has several organizations to help them.
And one of the best stories of my life happened in the Aida refugee camp. Actually wrote it for the Guardian newspaper. It was myself and an Irish fiddle player, a violinist by the name of Colum McCann. And we both went to the refugee camp together. And when we sat with Abdel Fattah, who was the spokesperson for the camp, he told us that there was a busted violin in the corner that nobody had been able to fix. And my friend Colin, he stood up and in the course of our conversation fixed the violin, fixed the fiddle, and then played Roisin Dove, an ancient Irish love song in the office, which made Abdel Fattah cry. And it is an extraordinary thing. And you know, for people who don't know, Aida refugee camp, it's considered the most tear-gassed place, you know, on the face of our planet. And it's a hotbed of all sorts of different things, but it's really a hotbed of creativity, brilliance, beauty, and all those beautiful, incredible young Palestinian children, you know, dancing and doing, like, engaging with the arts and so on, in the shadow of the wall. Yeah, what a place, and to be in upstate New York and dreaming of that place right now, I don't know what it means to the person, but it is a good place full of really good people.
I'm interested in your writing process for this novel. Did you have any plan or sketch which you then filled in over time, or did you start with a single grain or pebble which you added to over time as your interest or fancy directed you? Was it a kind of sculpture that already existed in your mind's eye, or was it something made up as you went along with found objects?
A little bit of everything that's there. You know, I found things as I went along. I had other things that were markers, but you know, the primary image that I used for this is that I felt like I was a conductor, and then there was all these musicians that came in with all these like wonderful, you know, there's a piano over there, and there's a contrabass over there, and there's a cello over there, and there's a like tin whistle over here, and I'm trying to conduct it all. And then suddenly at the back of the hall bursts open the door, somebody carrying a case, the size and shape of which of an instrument I've never seen before, and they sit down in the front row and they begin to play, and I have to accommodate that music. So that was what was happening, sort of in my head. All this new stuff arriving in my head as I tried to write the book. So yeah, I was a conductor.
So the metaphor that William, who asked this question, was he used art, visual art, but you are using more of a musical simile. I'm sorry I didn't introduce some of the people. Some of them don't have their names, but now, yeah. Okay, back to the question by Oedipus. He had planned to go back to Aida a month ago, but couldn't due to pandemic. Palestinians must fly through Jordan.
That's right.
Yeah. And then Tame asks, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. One question that came for me during the talk was about the title of the book. It seems perfectly suited for the idea of an infinite number of angles, as the reader adds unique understanding to the narrative.
Yeah, you know, the title of the book, which is a weird title, we have to admit it. You know, Apeirogon is a shape with a countably infinite number of sides, which means that we're all there, we're all complicit. You can land on a finite point within the infinite shape at any time, that you want, and that's what I want the readers to do. And if I want anything from all these people who've asked these questions and listened tonight, and God bless them, is just to look at the situation, start looking at some of the organizations that are doing and saying, interesting things, whether they be Israeli, like Breaking the Silence or bestselling, or whether they be in Palestine, doing all sorts of things with young people there, or whether they be in the United States, like Narrator and places like that. To join in the conversation and to nuance the conversation and to mess it up and to truss it up a little bit. And I think the more we continue to do that, the better off we're going to be. And it will be eventually in the spirit of the foundation, the Havel Foundation and other places, that says that is essentially what democracy happens to be.
Yeah, we need to hear those stories. If I can just add to this, what was really very powerful and striking was that, how Bassam's transformation was described, and how he, from within himself in prison, started looking at the politics and at Israelis in a very different way. And it was long before he experienced the tragedy of his daughter being killed, while Rami's track was really quite different. But at some point, how he recognized the very existence of Palestinians, which he wasn't paying attention to, which, as I think is a common, politics.
Yeah. Whether you be in Israel, whether you be in Alabama, whether you be in, Belfast, we know that large sections of the people get ignored, and sometimes it takes something terrible to shake us up out of our lethargy. But what Rami did was he recognized the humanity that was there, and it took a leap. And I think part of that leap comes through stories and storytelling, and through literature, and through our teachers in our schools, no matter where we happen to be. You're in Harvard, and like I'm in Hunter College, and we know the power of education, but some of the real power of education comes in those schools in Iowa, and and in Limerick, and in all sorts of places, Paris, and if we can tap the energy of the teachers, who are my true heroes, and build this from the bottom up, it's possible that we can re-engage with a proper sort of democracy, the sort of thing that we actually really want.
Maybe this is a good moment to show a picture of Rami and Bassam. Do you agree?
Absolutely.
Paula has one ready.
And I just want to thank everybody for being on the call as well.
Colin and Veronika, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing all your thoughts and creating such a lively and meaningful conversation, and covering so many important topics for today. And before I share the photo, I also would like to thank all the attendees for joining us. I'd like to thank people who sent their donations, and also I would like to encourage you that you can still do that, either through Eventbrite or on the website of the Havel Foundation. I also would like to very briefly invite you to join our second conversation that will take place on February 21st. And it will be with Czech journalist and political writer Jiří Pahe, former chief political advisor to President Havel, and now the director of New York University Center in Prague. And he will talk with Dr. Marilyn Wyatt, former US cultural attaché in Prague and our board member. And I would like to definitely finish this conversation with sharing the photo of the true heroes, of the heroes of your book. I hope I can do it. And I just, I'm sorry that Rami and Bassam couldn't be here with us tonight because of time difference. I hope they will watch it when we put it online, and I wish that all our guests, that you will be able to carry away their beautiful smiles and the energy and hope that at least I personally get from them, and believe that together we can discuss and fight for a better world for us and for our children. And thank you so much. Stay well and safe, and have a good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you, Veronika. Thank you, Pavla. See you soon.